apologetics. That is the name that we kind of set our mind to on here. Um, Welcome back, everybody. Been a few days. I am, well, how do you say it? Fully engaged in writing. I had started that last series and talking about four different things, and we talked about the churches of Christ, their background and their history, and the second one was what was fulfilled and what wasn't fulfilled. And the other two parts that I was starting to deal with was time statements and with the idea of bodily resurrection. Well, as I got into it and got into Don's book, Like Father, Like Son, and really looking at it and diving deep into what he was actually saying, it became quite interesting, and of course, it ended up having a life of its own and going off. And then, of course, coupled with what's been going on with Joel, Lance, Aaron, and a few others, I'm going to be having a little bit of fun. And I'll work with the guys and see if they're going to do this or not. But basically, right now, I've got my one computer here that has the regular camera, which is not real good. I have my other computer with a good camera that I attach to it. And then I have my phone. I can have all three. So basically what I'm thinking of doing and planning on doing, this will be kind of fun and kind of weird at the same time. See, with the phone app on the Facebook Live, I can add somebody else through, add it to it like Aaron did with Joel. So I haven't, well, let's just say it's going to be a surprise guest. But here's what I'm thinking about. It's Sunday night at 6 o'clock, so it's early enough that if we get carried on, it doesn't go on to people's late night and all of that. And we can actually cover it and deal with what we're going to be dealing with there, which I'll tell you about in just 1 second. So I will have it on a YouTube channel going live. I will have it on Facebook, on another computer live. And then with a guest, I will have it also Facebook Live. And that's the tricky thing. I haven't figured out yet if that will work, having two Facebook Live feeds going at the same time on my account. So this should be absolutely fun. The one would be just regular. The other one, I would do it and put it into one of the groups and have it specifically in the group so everybody can sign in. I've requested to join back up with Barry Isaacs' Preterism Debate for that purpose. I got off there. I was just done with I.O. and anything that I see from an I.O. I will automatically block them. Rude, capricious people, and just don't need it. And that last meme that was put up by somebody that was not even close to being appropriate or acceptable in any way, shape, or form, Barry approved it, and I was not very happy with that at all. There's a certain point where you step across the line, and those things are just not acceptable. Those kind of pictures. So, but I will just use it if they want to for this point, because I do want preterists to be able to engage and listen to what we're going to do. And what we're going to do and what I want to do, especially starting on the Sunday night, is, and I talked about it with the other guys in the other thing, but I want to go through his book, Like Father, Like Son, and all these things that I point out. So what I've done is I've pulled up a bunch of the quotes and everything, and I will try to have that. Now that's the other thing I got to work on is finding a software where I can do screen shots and or incorporated, like David Gates used, whatever. I just haven't found the right program yet to do that. So if anybody's got recommendations, if you want to send them to me, so that I can put up the screenshots, because I have it on Kindle, of course, his books, and I'll be able to look at the pages and go to the quotes on the pages and look through things, and we could see it right there together and read it and be able to deal with this much better. See, right now, Don Pressman has been going through he just finished up going through Doc Brock Hollett's book and tearing it apart. And there are some things that I have some major difference on some of his, it's kind of a dispensational view, for instance, of saying that For example, that another temple has to be built in during the millennial kingdom or the tribulation kingdom in order for it to be torn down again. That's one of the things I completely disagree with, based on Old Testament prophecy of Zechariah 12 and 14, where it says, on the day of his second coming, God comes and is protecting the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And those are one of those other things that we'll get into later with this, because I know that Don deals with some of that stuff in his book, and that's what we want to do. So I am announcing, let's see if this will work here. I am announcing, hey, yes, Sunday night, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Time, which is my time. That would be 7 o'clock East Coast, and I think 7 o'clock for Nova Scotia, at 8 o'clock Nova Scotia time. So it'll be a little bit later for Joel and all that, but of course earlier as we go into the West Coast. I will be doing Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and we will be discussing and going over Like Father, Like Son with a special guest. And that special guest, of course, will have the book, have it read, at least, and know where we're going with all of that. So that is what is happening. So put that on the calendar and be ready to go. Now, in this next thing I want to talk about right here, when I'm going through that book, and I know there's differences of interpretations in how things are, and we all bring assumptions and presuppositions to the table. Now, I was looking through a lot of what he wrote specifically in some other places. Here is something that Don stated on a post in refuting Sam Frost's some statements about him in his book and things that Sam has said. Don quote says, Frost once taught the truth of covenant eschatology but abandoned it, claiming that he had discovered major logical and scriptural flaws in the system. The problem was that Frost could not bring himself to jettison church history and the creeds. He chose the works of men over the word of God. And this is dishonest Don working, right from the get-go. Because Sam Frost didn't go to church history and creeds and everything else to do it. It just sounds biblical exegesis that we look at the scriptures first, then we go and look at what other people said. Then when we look at what other people said, we hear something new. We go back to scriptures and see if that can be backed up. Sam is a scholar, not a novice, an amateur. He knows how to do that. He knows how to go through the Word of God first and does that. But as I said in my last one of my last videos, when I talked about the Churches of Christ and their background, they, of course, deny theology proper. They deny everything of the early church fathers and all this. But here's the telling point, of what Don says, and this is the characteristics that I was talking about within the Churches of Christ and that mentality that has been brought up in them. To jettison church history. See, we don't jettison church history. We don't pretend like it never existed or that it never happened. That is simply a failure of scholarship. To understand that there were some brilliant minds from Augustine to Irenaeus to Thomas, all kinds of brilliant minds that worked on different doctrines and things, especially those who formulated the Trinity and the Incarnation, two major doctrines that most, even Church of God in Christ and preterists even still hold to. But, of course, they fail in understanding the full understanding of what is the Incarnation, and that's something we'll get into in another video. But we don't jettison church history and the creeds, because any preterists, if we were to go through in our own words and ask them, do you believe that Jesus died and rose again? Did he, Pontius Pilate, all of those things, they would agree with every point except for two, of course. The bodily resurrection or anything that talks about a future second coming. Those two things they will deny, but they will, of course, agree with everything else. And if you were to ask them, Hey, what do you believe? They would give you a list of beliefs that they would, and it would sound just like a creed. Um, and if I asked and you asked, and that, I mean, it'd be the same answers, hopefully. So for them to sit there and say that we don't accept creeds is disingenuous. It is just absolutely disingenuous to say that you don't have a statement of faith and or a set of beliefs that you go by and that you understand. It's like if I was to ask you about the Word of God, do you believe it is the Word of God, or do you believe it contains the Word of God? Most of them will say under a Protestant type of thing because they will say that they agree. Of course, see, the Church of Christ was born out of the Reformation movement in the Great Awakening in about 1870. So it was a group of people who were part of that who didn't like the Methodist Church, the rules, the regulations, and they figured, well, let's go back to the original second church and do it, second century church, and let's do it the way the second century church do it. So, of course, he would say, of course, then we jettison everything in church history has done from that point forward. We ignore it, we toss it aside, and we wrestle again with all the theology and all of those things on our own, based on our own Bible studies, so we don't need those people. But yeah, here's where the hypocrisy comes from, though. Because someone like Don Preston right now, who's going through the Olivet Discourse, he's teaching about the Olivet Discourse and what he believes it says and what it's all about. The early church fathers did nothing different than that. They just didn't have videos recorded. They wrote it down. They wrote books. Don writes books. He wants to teach people what he believes. The early church fathers did the exact same thing. So why are we telling them get rid of them? As if we can't learn anything from them. And of course, I deal with the idea that the early church fathers are good for two things. One, we learn verifiable facts about the church, like who died when, what happened, and things like this. For example, every press will agree that, according to Eusebius, he tells the truth when he says the Christians fled Jerusalem and went to Pella. They all agree with this, and it's taught in history. It becomes a historical fact. So if you have 4 or 5 people that sit there and tell you, yeah, John lived to about 98, 100. Yes, John lived to about 98, 100. And it's repeated and it's said by different people. And not based on one person's error, but because it's just kind of common knowledge and everybody is, yeah, John lived to about the time of Domitian, after Domitian to the time for John and other things like this. And these are men who lived during that time period who were sitting there saying that. For instance, Polycarp, who said that he was a hearer, if not a follower of John, or an apostle, or excuse me, a disciple of John, which sounds very possible, but we've lost pretty much almost all of his works. In just a few things there. So, Joel just sent me a message about the group, and he's looking for a name sheet, domain name to set up a website where we can post articles and things like this. So he was working there, but that's a side note, of course. So getting back to what I'm saying, we don't jettison church history, we don't jettison the creeds, we use it for a sound, logical thing. So in these next few videos, I'm going to be dealing with 2 basics that he kind of messes up with. One is anthropology, and the study of anthropology in man, and the other is incarnation. It's a kind of a foundation to get into, and when we start with the books, because of course it is about you bring into anything that you write, you bring in your presuppositions and your assumptions and things that you basically believe already. And for Don, of course, it's basic Gnosticism, and all of the preterists are struck with the disease of Gnostic belief, and the core belief of that, of course, is that physical and spiritual do not ever meet. They're not part of the same thing. Spiritual, the natural comes first, then spiritual, and so man becomes spiritual, and everything that's physical doesn't really count. The real world, of course, is spiritual. But N.T. Wright and many others argue, Protestant scholars all talk about really the end result is all about heaven and earth, the physical and the spiritual united together in one realm, where God lives with man face to face as the supreme point and ending of the biblical narrative, and where it describes what happens after that doesn't even enter the imagination of man, but it has man and God living face to face on a recreated earth. All of those things, of course, which they reject because they tie it all into AD 70. All right, enough of that is said as a background and a start to it. So we'll be covering that, and we're going to thank you guys for who subscribes and sharing this and passing it on. So remember, pass on the information at Sunday night, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Time, Facebook time, YouTube. We'll have that all available, the links and everything else when we do it, and we'll get prepared as we get close to that time. That will be posted up there, but we will be dealing with Preston's book, Like Father, Like Son. Thanks for listening in. We'll catch you on the backside.